resources. It's free, and we've got a link to it online. But he'll now some background on what's involved so that we can understand the importance of this when doing clinical research.
Thank you. Good morning. So I'm Victoria, and I'm a Research Governance Manager now, which is who looks after the R&D department, and this is in the Mental Health Trust in Oxford, but this is just a recent move. So I'm going to talk to you about governance and regulations, and it's quite a dry subject, so hopefully my talk is going to be of interest. So, regulation in research. I'm sure you've probably heard this said many times by people, and if not, you will do. Too much regulation, and I agree, there is. But we're bound by it. There are plenty of papers. You can do a search, and I've just listed two here, which are actually quite forthright in their condemnation of bureaucracy and the regulations that are controlling clinical trials and research in general. However, regulations is part of society. We're governed by rules and regulations, and we know that they're in place to protect us and society and those who are able to protect themselves, such as traffic laws, highway code. I think we all recognise that. So with motorised vehicles, we saw an increase in mortality. So in 1931, when the highway code was first introduced, there were about just under 2.5 million vehicles in Britain, and there were 7,000 people killed on the roads at that time. This is just a representation of the chaos. In 2011, and this is statistics from the government UK Gov website, in 2011 there were less than 34.5 million with less than 2,000 people killed. So huge increase in car activity and usage, but less death on the roads. As the just keep an eye on I'm okay. So what do we accept as the norm today? Roadworthiness, MOT. You're eligible to drive, you need a driving test. Insurance, and of course highway code and traffic laws. These measures ensure our safety and our roads are maintained. It's the same in research. You have to have a level of protection to protect yourselves and your trusts, your institutions wherever you're working, and of course the patients. And these are the regulations that, generally speaking, cover most of the research taking place within the UK, and obviously if it's in the EU, in the EU Clinical Trials Directive. Different regulations, slightly different regulations if you're going further afield, the rest of the world. So let's just have a quick run through of the history, and some of you might have already had a look at some of this history behind it and already know about it, but we'll just go through it. So we've got the Tuskegee study, which took place in 1932. It was a study on rural African men, syphilis study. They were not consented, and these people believed that they were being given free health care. They were denied effective treatment, which is penicillin. And considering that this study started in 1932 and the discovery of penicillin in 1928, which is then widely available in 1945, you can see that this is really morally and ethically dreadful, repugnant really. Another study in 1937, treatment for bacterial infections. So this treatment was coated to make them more palatable for children to swallow. Fine, very acceptable. However, 107 children died after ingesting this. And the coating that they'd chosen to use hadn't been tested and was actually antifreeze. You know. So a few more history lessons. Nuremberg doctors' trials and thalidomide tragedy. And I'm sure we've all heard about these. So the Nuremberg doctors' trial was experiments, as we know, conducted on prisoners without consent, and it led to a code of 10 ethical standards for research, foremost of which is voluntary consent is absolutely essential. And then, of course, you've got the thalidomide tragedy, where you had women being given a drug that hadn't been tested, and it was common practice in those days. Patients were unaware, and their GP said, here, take this drug, it will help you with your morning sickness. They took them. It resulted in 10,000 babies in Europe and Africa being born with birth defects. I think it was in America that they actually picked this up and stopped it. I think they tried to sell it to the American markets, and the regulators said no. And even as recently as this, we've got Northwick Park, the phase 1 trial, where there were serious adverse reactions in the healthy volunteers. So you can almost see it, people lined up in a row, one after another, given a drug, and no time between to check what was happening with the first patient. So there's a lot more regulation around that. There's a lot more I think it's more common sense, really. If you've got a drug that's new, you test it, you make sure you've tested it, and make sure that the first patient you've given it to, first health volunteer you've given it to, no reaction is apparent before you go on to the next ones. So, regulation within research. You need to have a sponsor, obviously, in place. You'll need ethical approval, and this will be from either an NHS Research Ethics Committee, or it could be from an institutional and a university ethics committee. If you're testing a new drug or a device, then you will need to get competent authorisation from the competent authority, the MHRA, and then of course you'll need to get NHS permission, and this is through the ID departments, of which this is what my new role is. I'm a manager of one of these. So other things you need to consider is the Data Protection Act. If you're going to, and it's fine, you can do this, but you need to get express permission from the government to access patient information without consent. And there are obvious reasons for doing that. If you've got a huge study, enormous cohort, multi-centre, it's not going to be practical to get consent. You can apply through one of these research ethics committees that will actually review this and be honest with you about whether it's applicable and whether you can do it. Also, the Mental Capacity Act, this again will need to be flagged by a specific research ethics committee, and there will be consent constraints around this. You will need to consider getting consent from incapacitated adults. You'll need to get that consent from a legal representative or a partner or somebody of that nature. And also, if you're recruiting children, you'll need to get parental consent. Human Tissue Act. So if you're going to take anything that is considered relevant to the Human Tissue Act, you will need to ensure that if you're going to keep it after the end of your project, you will need to store it in a licensed tissue bank. So ethical appearable, this is through Research Ethics Committee and NHS Research Ethics Committee, and they will review your research that's going to be taking place in an NHS environment, and this is required by law and policy. And this will actually include gene therapy studies as well. So there's Gene Therapy Advisory Committee. You can submit your application online, and it's actually now going to be so much easier because you will submit you'll fill in your complete data set with all the information on your trial, and it will actually allow you to go to all the governing bodies in one go. There is a proportionate review within the Research Ethics Committee process. So if you have a study that's questionnaire studies, or it's minimal invasive basic science using healthy volunteers, or it's just collecting tissue or data for research, then you can use what they call proportionate review, which is a much quicker process. It's not the huge meeting where everybody will review it, and it can be a telephone consultation between the Ethics Committee and yourself, so you don't need to attend the meeting. So if you have a trial that's with a drug, an unapproved drug or device trial, then you've got to present it to the MHRA, and they will review the safety of the medicine for use in the participants that you're targeting. Again, there's another fast-track system. So all the regulators are becoming aware that it needs to be much more pragmatic. There needs to be a much more less bumpy ride to getting your approvals in place. And these actually are for medications such as an aspirin study. It's not within its normal indication or dosage, or anything that's off-label use, particularly with children. You can get this fast-track system. If you're not sure, the best thing to do is to check the website, even send your protocol or your synopsis to the MHRA and ask for their considered opinion. Also, you need to consider that some over-the-counter medicines will be considered a clinical trial needing to be submitted to the MHRA for their approval, and even probiotic. So I think there was a premature baby study where they were giving them probiotic and they had to get MHRA approval for that. So it's always best to check. So the notification scheme for these fast-track processes mean that you will, if your application actually fulfills the criteria, you will be given a letter by the MHRA which confirms that it fits this criteria, and you can actually go ahead with your trial 14 days from the receipt of that letter. You don't need to wait for any other approval. That is your approval. Frequent causes for non-acceptance, so the MHRA chuck it back at you basically. Your safety monitoring in the protocol is not being considered. Contraception, if you've got lactating women or if you've got women with childbearing potential, consideration that you've applied in your protocol for this monitoring and safety of those. Follow-up provision and also dose level and duration seems to be a sticky point. And the manufacture and control of the placebo project that you're going to be using. So there's a lot to think about. NHS permission, this is through your R&D departments, and depending on your trial, and this is usually what you'll hear a lot of people talking about, is the NIHR and their acceptance of studies onto a portfolio, which means that they will go through this system called CSP, that we all talk in acronyms, but it's actually a coordinated system for gaining NHS permission across multi-centre sites, so you don't need to go to each individual trust, you just send your documents to one place and they are disseminated for you. It also gives you access to resources that are funded by the NIHR. So for recruitment, you might get help with nurse time, and you'll get help with pharmacy and radiation assessments as well. So it's worth considering working out if your study is actually eligible to go on the NIHR portfolio. Don't try and start your trial until you've got your NHS permission, though. You will probably frighten the R&D department if you start it before that. So I think